All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Grow Your Own Pathways from Teacher to the Superintendency for Women webinar today. I'm very excited to be able to co-host today's webinar from the National Center for Grow Your Own with our friends at Women Leading Ed. We have incredible panelists on for today's session, and I'm going to do quick introductions of those individuals. First, we have Dr. Kyla Johnson-Trammell, Superintendent of Oakland Unified School District. We have Dr. Lisa Coombs, Superintendent of the Virginia Department of Education. And we have Dr. Julia Rayful-Bear, CEO and founder of ILO Group and Women Leading Ed. I do just want to call out that all three of these esteemed panelists all have their doctorate degree, but when it comes time for the discussion, I'll be referring to them by their first name just to help alleviate any confusion of saying doctor. But they all are very well accomplished, not just in their careers, but also their educational backgrounds as well. Please, folks, if you have any questions throughout today's session, please submit them into the Q&A. We will do our best to get to as many of those as possible at the end of our session. I think the thing that makes me excited to co-host this webinar of Women Leading Ed today is just simply put, I have personally benefited from incredible women mentors who were superintendents throughout my entire career. We were just chatting before this about how Julie and I both share a mentor in Dr. Lillian Lowry, who forever changed my life. And I think more men need to get involved in this work. There's too many. We have over 80% of women, I believe, or over 80% of teachers are women, and yet those percentages only go down along the way. And we're going to start today's webinar from hearing from an expert on this work with Dr. Julia Rayful-Bear. So, Julia, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick things off with incredible work that your organizations have done.
David, thank you so much, and thanks for bringing up Lillian, who is the co-founder and one of the originators of Women Leading Ed. Women Leading Ed is a national network for women in educational leadership. Our mission goes beyond individual empowerment. We're actively reshaping the public understanding and media narratives around the challenges that women face in educational leadership. We take an approach that's grounded in rigorous research and targeted advocacy, and what we're trying to do is drive change in both perception and policy nationwide. Our work extends from doing one-on-one and group coaching. We do cohort-based leadership training programs, and we establish strong peer-to-peer networks regionally around the country. We also provide 24/7 crisis supports to women around the country. We're not only trying to equip women with the skills and resilience to lead, but we're also trying to really amplify women's voices in the public sphere. Women Leading Ed is advancing the cause for gender equality in educational leadership and trying to really foster a broad public awareness about this issue. I am so thrilled to be partnering with the National Center on Grow Your Own, and I am so honored to be able to share the virtual stage with both State Superintendent Coombs and our own board chair, Dr. Johnson-Trammell. So let's dig into our research a little bit. So a number of years ago, Stephen Sawchuk at Ed Week identified this gap that existed about information about the state of the superintendency. He wrote a piece wondering, why don't we have any publicly available database, and why is the federal government not taking this on to put out the data? We decided to jump in, and we wanted to fill that gap. We created the Superintendent Research Project a number of years ago so that we could create a publicly available third-party data set about gender and leadership in the nation's largest districts. Our data set looks at the top 500 largest districts in the country. Just to put in perspective, nearly half of our nation's kids are in these school districts. It's kids in districts from 16,000 students all the way up to New York City. From the start, we saw that women were notably underrepresented. And as we dove in deeper, we realized that we really needed to look at the state level as well. We also look at salary disparities. We look at regional trends. We took a look at the pandemic's influence, especially at the unprecedented levels of turnover that we were seeing. And our latest release, which was in September, showed that we've really made little progress within the gender imbalance that exists in educational leadership. So let's take a look at this. First, as you can see here, progress is painfully slow. Our database goes back to July of 2018. Women represented less than 28% of superintendents in these top 500 largest districts. Fast forward 6 years later, we've only gotten to 30.4%. That is 152 women in the top 500 districts. That means it's 14 more women in 6 years. Another important observation is that we do see a year of decline when you look at that 2019 to 20. And then afterwards, we start to see this uptick, which corresponds with when things like Women Leading Ed began. And our work is really to try to bring other organizations along to create more of a sense of understanding about the importance of having initiatives that really focus around gender equality. Overall, the turnover in the superintendency has been historically high. Historically, the kind of rates that we hear are about 14 to 16%. What we see in our analysis, though, is an incredible uptick. This past year, we saw a 21% turnover. It's 107 districts. And when we looked at the pandemic levels of turnover, we saw levels that were a 47% increase when we were comparing the pre-pandemic to the post-pandemic years. Despite all of the kinds of frequency of vacancies, women are still being selected for these positions less than a third of the time. And when women leave their roles, nearly 7 out of 10 times, they are replaced by men, but men are replacing men at similar rates. Ultimately, education is supposed to be the thing that gives future generations stability, but we can't keep that promise when the leadership isn't stable, and if ultimately entire subsets of leaders are denied that opportunity to lead. We also take a look at regional trends, and what we see at the regional levels are very big differences as you take a look. And all of these differences are areas we're really starting to dig into to better understand the regional level policy decisions that are likely impacting some of this. As you can see, we see in the South, it's 23%. The Northeast stands out at 51%. And these ranges around the country end up being very stark when you start to bring in race and ethnicity data. Let's take a look now at the Northeast. So the Northeast is a place that not only has now surpassed the 50% mark, it's at its 51%, but it also is a different kind of turnover. While the national average this past year was 21%, the Northeast was slightly lower at 19%. But interestingly, of the 37 districts in the Northeast that are in the top 500, 7 underwent leadership changes in the last year. 5 of those 7 were women who got the job. Another noteworthy point on this is that almost half of the current female superintendents in the Northeast previously served in an interim capacity before they took that top role. So as you think about this, these are women who are ascending to their position through these internal pathways and then into these top roles. This past year, we did a deeper analysis in a state. We looked at what was happening within Texas. Texas has over 1,000 school districts, and we mapped what was happening in a collaboration with Educate Texas and Community Foundation of Texas. We found that the representation of female district superintendents in Texas is even lower than the national average. National average at 30%, Texas is down at 27%. But as we started to really dig into this, we were mapping who was doing the searches, trying to better understand who school boards were turning to conduct the searches in the state. We saw that there was a range between regional support entities, search firms, law firms, and others who were doing these searches. And then we learned a lot about the outcomes based on who was conducting the search, how that looked as we looked at different size districts and different regions of the state. And we really uncovered the choice that ends up happening and how those choices influence gender representation, as well as different hiring processes. We are always happy to partner with other states on doing a similar tailored report and helping states to really start to change the data collection that they're doing to add superintendent gender to the normal data collection that they're doing, and particularly around issues of transparency of outcomes. Widening back out to look at the national picture, we took a look at pathways that leaders take to the superintendency. And what we find is that women are more likely to get positions as permanent superintendents when they're selected first as an internal candidate. This is a very strong endorsement of the need to grow your own pathways. We're really thinking about how you're shaping and cultivating pathways for teachers from pre-service years all the way up into the most senior levels of the organization. What we found as we looked at the top 500 is that women really are only landing in the top 500 from an external role, meaning they are coming from outside of that district 27% of the time. they're far more likely to land in that top role as the internal candidate. And what we start to really see as we dig in more on that is that women who are contemplating this progression to the superintendency are more likely to report having the kinds of supports and sponsors within their current district, helping to support them than when they're doing it on the external side. As we took a look at the interim situation, what we saw is that nationally, 31% of women who are in the superintendency today served as the interim, compared to only about a quarter of the men. And so what this says to us is that there is a pattern where women, when positioned internally and then serving as the interim first, stand a higher chance of being chosen for the permanent leadership role. On one hand, we can look at this as evidence that there is a strong likelihood that for women, they're going to have more of an opportunity to step into those leadership roles, but it's also evidence of the ways in which bias can play out, in that women have to first show that they can do the job, have to really knock it out of the park with their results, and then are more likely to then land in that permanent position, whereas men are more likely to be selected when they're coming in as an external candidate, and more on the chance that they're going to be able to do the job that they are applying for. When evaluating the hiring within the top 500 largest districts, the composition of school boards, who play a pivotal role in most hiring decisions, is critically significant. This was the first year we took a look at school board members by gender. And what we observed is that in districts where women constitute 75% or more of the board seats, there was an increased likelihood that they would select a woman as their superintendent. In fact, nearly half the time, boards that were 75% or more women, more board members, selected their superintendent as a woman. In boards where men represented 75% or more of the seats, only about a third of the superintendents are female. All of the data and all of the research that we do serves as the foundation for our advocacy agenda. The QR codes on this page will take you to our advocacy agenda. In this past April, we held our first Women Leading Ed Summit. We brought together district and state superintendents from around the country and those who aspire to get into those top roles for an opportunity to come together with their peers to set the collective advocacy agenda that guides Women Leading Ed, and to provide a space to be able to make sure that we were really talking about the data and the research and the findings in a way that could really lead to action. From the summit came out this playbook, The Time Is Now, that grounds everything that we do as a network. The playbook calls for action at the district, state, and federal levels to implement policies that can ensure that women have a fair shot, not only at getting into those top jobs, but to sustain them for the long term. We synthesize years of workplace research, and we outline strategies and practices that those most proximate to the problem believe can help to change outcomes long term. Things like creating and promoting intentional support systems that help to prepare women, also rebalancing these hiring processes and really thinking about the roles in which bias plays at every part of these processes, making sure that we're retooling our systems of supports to be cognizant of the reality of elder care responsibilities and other well-being supports that benefit everyone. Ultimately, we believe setting public goals for female leadership and increasing the transparency around data state by state, and to set real goals that make sense within a state context, will matter a lot. And we need to pay men and women the same amount for doing the same job. Unfortunately, these differences are incredible, both at the state level and at the district level. Here are the QR codes for the playbook and for the Superintendent Research Project. We are so thrilled to be working with the National Center on Grow Your Own on helping to really drive some bigger changes in all of this critical work. So David, thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of our research.
Yeah, and thank you, Julia. Really appreciate that. One thing that Julia will not brag about herself on this, but I'm very want to give honor where honor is due. Julia, what is the current number of people you have placed in the superintendency? I know it's over 50, but where are we now? It's incredible.
We're at 52.
There you go. There we go. That is incredible work to imagine that. So that intentionality that Julia has taken on, and we're now going to pivot to talk about intentionality from a systems point of view at a district and state level. Questions for Kyla and Lisa. I'm sure what Julia shared resonated with the both of you. I'm wondering if each of you can share about your career pathways from starting in education to your respective roles now as superintendents at the district and state level. Kyla, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be here and to be here with one of my favorite folks, Julia. Such a great and important discussion. When I think about my role to this seat, it was definitely happenstance. And I say that because one, I come from a family of educators. And so the last thing I thought I would be doing is going into education. Um, Always worked with kids through high school, through college. And I'm just realizing now that one kind of turning point was at University of Pennsylvania. I got involved in our University Assisted Community Schools division, and I worked with youth in West Philadelphia. I thought I just did it because it filled my cup. I think those were the seeds that were planted that this would become my career. Ended up coming back to my hometown where I grew up. I started teaching 2 blocks below where I literally grew up. And as a teacher, I had a wonderful mentor in my principal. And so I think like one theme from my role from teacher to teacher leader, assistant principal, principal, through the curriculum and instruction, and I am that classic case that is referred to in the research of having gone the academic trajectory and having the ability to kind of be the interim before the seat was available. But in all of these different positions, there was always a mentor, someone who kind of pulled me out, saw something in me, fed me, nurtured me, nudged me along the way. And that's really how I got into the position that I was. I have some colleagues that knew from the time they were an embryo that they wanted to be a superintendent. That was not my case. I think it was just exploring my passions, which were children, being able to make change in the classroom that led to the school, right? Which led to how do you make more systemic change? And I think that really being coupled with people who saw something in me, sometimes that I didn't see in myself, and that gave me opportunity.
So like Kyla, I think it's been that traditional pathway for me, starting as a teacher, moving to a principal, then a curriculum supervisor. And then actually I moved from a district role to a state role, and then moved from a state, director to an assistant superintendent to a chief academic officer. So it's been an interesting pathway, but I had lots of mentors, but I always fought this concept of moving forward. I actually was pre-med in college because my entire family of educators were educators and were focused on education. I was like, nope, I'm going to do something different. And then I got to the teacher role and I was like, yep, I love kids. This is where I want to stay. And then people encouraged me to do other things. And I think the interesting space that holds is a lot of it is, do I want to move into a leadership role or the next leadership role? Am I capable of being in that leadership role? Is there someone saying you can do this role constantly? And I didn't always trust that that was me, right? Like I did a really good job as a teacher, was really happy as a teacher, but do I really want to leave the classroom? Is that next leadership role mine? Do I really want to leave the principalship? Is that next leadership mine? Do I really want to work at the state? And honestly, I had women in each of those spaces saying yes, and saying, yes, you should be doing this. Yes, you should be doing that. And this role in particular, I had a couple of different women leaders who truly sponsored me. And I think there's a difference between mentoring and sponsoring. And we as women leaders need to start sponsoring more people, because a sponsor opens up their networks. They don't just mentor you and say you can, they give you the network to be able to do it. And I think that's an incredible space that we as women leaders need to also mentor those people, saying, yes, you can, have you thought about? But we also need to open up our network. And I love Women Leading Ed because it provides that intricate network, but opening up that network and opening up that network and sponsoring others to become leaders is an important space that we all need to be in as we reflect on our own journey.
Really appreciate both of your insights on that, and follow up actually for both of you. Um, as you both know well, in any role, who you work for can make or break that experience, as well as can your ability to be effective. Kyla, you report to a school board, while Lisa, you report to a governor. Can you tell me about how your decision making to accept your respective roles factored in finding the right fit for you with your respective boss, or Kyla, bosses? Lisa, we'll start with you on this one.
So when I finally decided I wanted to do the state superintendent, one of the things that wise people told me is you have to fit the state that you're going to work in. Not only do you have to fit whether a state superintendent works for a board, whether they're elected or they're appointed by a governor, you really have to fit the ideologies of that state. So first and foremost, when I was researching states that I wanted to be in and states that I wanted to be a part of the educational movement, I wanted to make sure that my philosophies and practices matched that state. And then for me, what is the structure as a state superintendent I wanted to operate under? Do I want to operate with a board? Do I want to operate with a governor? Do I want to go through an election? I can squarely say that that is not my cup of tea, but what is that space? And I truly looked at the appointments and the governors who had the same beliefs, but also governors who stood for education and children. So one of the things that was exciting to me working in Tennessee is I knew our governor leaned into education and what education meant as an opportunity for Tennessee. And so when I was thinking about Virginia and I was researching Governor Youngkin, what impressed me the most was how much he talked about education, how much he talked about the importance of education, and how much he talked about the belief that parents should engage in education and the whole community is part of the educational process. And I deeply believe in those pieces. So it was exciting to me to find someone whose vision matched my vision. Given the amount of work and the amount of things you do at the state level, it's important for those vision and those missions to match. So for me, it was about someone who believed in the same things, but also put a stake in the ground around education as an important component of the state.
Yeah, I would say fit is definitely super important, and there are many different ways that you can look at that. I think from a political perspective, you do your homework, right? But at a certain point, some of those things are outside of your control. When you're coming in, you have to really be clear about who you are, what are your kind of core beliefs about learning and how you want to lead. That's so, so important. There are things that you're going to learn along the way when you're in the role, but that kind of know thyself and what your non-negotiables are about the work that you want to do is a great way to kind of organize how you're doing your due diligence around the districts that you want to work for. It'll lead you to kind of think through size, demographics, kind of slice of a type of school, suburban, rural, urban. It'll lead you to think about, do you want to be somewhere that authorizes charters or not? It'll lead you to think about, are you someone who likes to come in, disrupt, and create foundation? Or do you want to take something and grow, right? These are all the questions that are uber important so that you can really pick the right district for you. For me, I was compelled by the mission and vision of our district, the fact that we had been on this journey around community schools. So that's another layer, looking at the mission, looking at the vision. Now, with boards or governors, depending on how long you're in a role, right, you can control who you decide to partner with initially. But after that, right, you don't necessarily have control over how long folks are going to be in those places and spaces, right? You'll have to come to WLE to learn, what you do. That's like a little trailer for the movie if you want to learn how to deal with those pieces. But yeah, I think fit is extremely important. And I think not being so excited, and sometimes this happens to us as women and women of color, we get so excited to have the seat that we don't really make sure that the table where we're going to be sitting, right, is really going to match us. And so I think that's very important.
Yeah. Thank you. And Kyla, we're gonna come to you later about how you've been able to not just sustain but excel for such a period of time that you may have seen some changes during your tenure as well in those situations. But Julia, for you, and hearing about Kyla and Lisa's journeys, what was unique, but also what was potentially similar to other women leaders in education as they climb the career ladder?
I mean, I think for both Kyla and Lisa, they underscored a couple things that matter significantly. This need to really match around vision and mission, whether you're going to work for a governor or whether you're going to a board, and not trying to bend yourself into being someone that you're not, is ultimately the most important. Getting to that place of genuine leadership and knowing who you are, your core beliefs, and being able to know those non-negotiables is so significantly important. And when I think about both what Kyla and Lisa have been able to do to find places where those matches were there, each of them was able to come into those job interviews with real clarity about what they were bringing to the table in a way that really showed their power and helped to demonstrate who they were going to be and how they would continue to show up. Ultimately, sponsors matter so much in this work. I think Lisa's point about moving beyond mentoring and really focusing around who those sponsors are, people that clear that seat for you, speak your name when you are not in the room, and who are there for you no matter what. They're never trying to undermine your career. They're not getting on the phone and saying something different to someone than what they say to you. It's all of those aspects of sponsoring that we have to really intentionally work on. Ultimately, women in our country are facing both systemic and informal obstacles that are impeding so much of their journey and is causing so much more of an advantage for male leaders. It's everything from just the day-to-day way that bias seeps in, not only in our definitions and understanding societally about who is a leader and what a leader shows up seeming like, but also just outright discrimination in these hiring processes. When we look at all of the invisible work that so often falls on women, and particularly as we're looking at an increase in elder care responsibilities in these countries, we've got to do so much more around family-friendly policies and leave practices. And we know that these pay inequities are already so stark without even adding on all of these invisible tasks and burdens. So there's just a lot of work that we've got to get done. And at every stage, what's happening for women is having stronger and stronger headwinds. It's why we're so passionate about this Grow Your Own Pathway work, because it's starting from the very beginning of pre-service and how we're mentoring women in those induction moments, and then at every stage in their career ladder. We just have these broken pipelines that are funneling women away from critical leadership roles, critical responsibilities, particularly around finance and operations. And then in all of this, you have these countless years of uncompensated additional and invisible duties. And so you end up with women staying longer in career rungs than their male counterparts, and they're taking on jobs that are not as likely to translate into that top role as compared to what their men are being offered. So a multitude, David, of areas we got to really address as we do our Grow Your Own work together.
Oh, absolutely. I think the one thing that just stands out to me as somebody who has, after teaching and being a principal, worked in talent at the district level and the state level. And so I've seen a lot of resumes. And so hearing, specifically something you said, Lisa, like it just always will blow my mind how, like, because I've worked with Lisa, so I have the utmost respect for her incredible intelligence work and everything. And now it's so exciting to see her in Virginia. But like ever hearing some of the folks like, am I ready? Or potentially even in some cases doubting themselves. And look, I'm painting with a broad brush, but it's I'm co-host of the webinar, so I'm allowed to right now. Like the amount of men who apply for jobs that not even closely like qualified or prepared, Julia, to what you just said, like the amount of folks with COO, CFO background and applying for a superintendent job, and they're like, oh, I can find a chief academic officer. It's like, but what would you ask? How would you find the right one? Like it's things like that. And so it just amazes me sometimes. Well, actually, men don't amaze me. Let me be clear about that. It doesn't surprise me there. I think what bothers me sometimes and makes me think, and I appreciate this focus, and I'm excited to learn more about mentorship or sponsorship, specifically what can men do, and we'll get to that a little later, but also just like there is so much talent in our districts and in our state systems that happen to be women that we need to if we really want to fix education in this country, getting more of them in the top seat will clearly have a better impact. But that's my soapbox, and that wasn't part of today's session. So anyway, Lisa, you know how I ramble, so sorry. But speaking of which, Lisa, Virginia recently announced a large investment into Grow Your Own registered apprenticeship pathways. You are literally removing financial barriers for aspiring teachers, and you are going to be pursuing the registered apprenticeship for the principalship. This work will likely result in more women having the opportunity to be a school leader. Why have you chosen to tackle this problem specifically at a state level?
I have had the opportunity to walk through a lot of classrooms in Virginia over the past 7 months. And since we started talking about Grow Your Own and talking about apprenticeships of those dedicated people, and often women, in the front secretary roles, in the school bus driver roles, in the instructional assistant roles, who everybody's like, they want to be teachers. They want to be teachers. They just can't quit their job. I'm like, why would they? They're like contributing in the school environment. They're doing a great job. Well, they would have to go to college. Why would they? And when we start talking about the apprenticeship concept, and we talk about what they already know and what they're already doing and how to flip the training to become a teacher on its ear, they're like, oh my gosh. And it has spread like wildfire, in particular through our rural communities who don't have pathways for their instructional assistants and their educational assistants, their wraparound staff to become teachers. And that's an equity issue. If this suburban school can have great teachers, so should this rural school, so should this high need school. But then we look at school leadership, and we're facing the same exact situation, right? We've got great teachers who are often taking on, as Julia said, a lot of extra responsibilities at home, a lot of extra things, who don't necessarily believe that they can be school leaders. And we're going to remove the same barriers that we are removing for great instructional assistants, great school staff to become teachers, to become leaders, and really thinking differently about how to get to be a principal. And being a principal through an apprenticeship model is a lot different than what we've experienced. A lot of times, as you mentioned, David, coaches become principals because they've done great leading seasons or they've done great things, but you've got this amazing instructional leader in the classroom who has taken a lot of work, and why aren't we moving them into principalship? And I think it's flipping that concept on its ear that Grow Your Own fundamentally does as a whole, like how to become a teacher, how to become a leader. And then it's removing those barriers that create the equity gaps that we currently are seeing, whether it's teaching, whether it's school leadership. We have a lot of barriers, whether they're belief barriers, whether they're fiscal barriers, whether they're opportunity barriers. And Grow Your Own fundamentally removes those from the teacher role. And we need to start thinking about how to remove those barriers from the school leadership role. I have a particular passion around how we support our school leaders. So I'm excited to embark upon this principalship Grow Your Own concept with the Grow Your Own Center. So I appreciate you inspiring us and helping us think through how we get this accomplished.
Yeah, well, thanks, Lisa. But also, Lisa, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Do you care to share about the investment that Virginia is making into this space? Because
we are still in budget negotiations. I know
okay.
how much I definitely have. I know what I'm asking for and what I'm hoping for, but I don't want to commit before we get final approval. So not yet, David. Not yet.
Okay. Well,
great answer, Lisa. Great answer.
You have not because you asked not. And that is one thing I know about it. She's going to make that ask on behalf of kids so that they get the teachers they need and deserve.
Right.
Kyla, I may have done a little background digging on you, and I believe you may or may not know a few things about winning championships being in Oakland, because I think I saw you technically at an event with Steph Curry not that long ago. And so I'm going to start with a little sports analogy to get into this question for you. So in sports, winning a championship the first time is that first mountaintop, but repeating as a champion, staying as a champion is even harder. You've achieved the superintendency, and I want to be clear when it's intentional to say the word achieved. That is not given to you. You earned that, and have had a long, successful tenure in the top seat. So first, congratulations. But second, what has allowed you not just to sustain, but to in the role, but also to excel? What advice do you have for those pursuing this position? Because it's not just about getting into that seat. It's not just about earning it. It's about having impact over an extended period of time.
Well, one, thank you, David. And I would say I'll just kind of talk about three things. One, belief. I definitely want to quadruple click on the importance of sponsorship. And three, just continuing to be a learner in your own leadership. Actually, I'm going to change that to four, which is pay it forward. So one, I think is particularly, I think, as a woman and a woman of color, right? Just going right back to the research that Julia so eloquently summarized, is you're going to have doubters and haters, right? And it's going to be at an individual level. A lot of what the research elucidates is just the design, the intentional design to be an exclusionary route. And so it means you have to fight harder, and mentally you have to be strong and prepared. And it doesn't mean you think you know everything, because you never will, but your belief in your ability to do it, your belief in your ability to learn, your belief in your ability to be able to navigate the challenge. That is so, so important, so that you can create the barricade, to give yourself time to think, to learn, and to take some of the risks that you're going to need to take, right, to improve whatever system you land in. So that's one. No one, and I think it's an ongoing practice. And, some of the things in WLE plug that we really talk about is, how you build that capacity to continue to have that growth mindset for yourself. We talk about it for everybody else, with the importance of yourself in order to lead as a woman of color. Two is the sponsorship. I feel that I was blessed that I had a couple of key sponsors. For the most part, they were male. And it wasn't just about, let me, help you get through the bad day, but really helping to break down the role of a superintendency, helping me a lot of times make sense of challenges, but opening the door to their network, helping me build relationships with key people in the community where I'm leading, so that I can build what I refer to as my kitchen cabinet, right? Just a very diverse group of experts, folks who hold power, folks who have knowledge. So as you're putting your strategy together around whatever, you've got people you can call, they will meet you for coffee, they will listen to your thoughts, help you see your blind spots. This job is not just about the degree you had, where you went to school, what your test score was, what your GPA. That only gets you so far. Then it becomes, are you connected to the right individuals, right? So that you have access to knowledge, thinking, and perspective, right? Because this is chess, not checkers, the work that we're in. And so without those folks, I would not have lasted probably the first 4 months with some of the challenges that I had to endure, even in my first year. And I can't underscore enough that difference between mentor might help you survive, but I think the thriving really gets to having people that are going to intentionally feed into your growth and development and help you build a network. There is not one person who's successful as a leader without a strong and thriving network. The third thing that I would say is, I'll just kind of go back to the importance of continuing to learn, which kind of goes back to a network. When you have people, right, you're constantly feeding. Maybe you need to grow your financial strategic leadership. You're surrounding yourself with people, right, that have strengths in other areas where you don't. You're learning new ways of thinking about how you can improve the lives for kids. So you're constantly, like, your point of acceleration to strengthen your ability to lead is just going to be faster and faster, right? When you're able to pull from your network. And then I'd say the fourth thing is particularly as a woman, but also as a male leader as well, is how you then, once you land in the opportunity, you represent the system. You now are in the seat to take some of these principles and apply it into your day-to-day leadership. So not just being a mentor, but thinking about who can you sponsor on an individual level. This is a lot of our playbook too, and how you help within the system that you have to disrupt and build new systems, right? So there's more intentional pathways, whether it's for teachers, principals, other folks who want to get into C-suite leadership, is building the systems that need to be in an organization, right? So we can change some of the statistics that we're seeing.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I think it's an incredible, I hope you come out with a book one day based on your tenure, because I think there's a lot of people that will reap the benefits of how you've not sustain, but excel for that long period of time. It's incredible. Julia, so our organizations are co-hosting this webinar, but we also are partnering to support districts and states on developing leadership pipelines from teacher all the way to superintendency. Would you care to share a little bit about this partnership?
I would be delighted to. Okay, I shared the odds, and we've been talking about this lack of progress for a really long time. We are a sector that is dominated by women. Nearly 8 in 10 teachers are women, about half of principals are women, but only 30% of superintendents are women. And when we look at the issues, particularly things around pay gap, it's just extraordinary, both at the district and the state level, what is happening for women. And it's time, and it's been over time, to really create more structured and supportive pathways. And this really has to be done at a state by state level and then within district level. This is stuff that we can talk about nationally, and we can help to put out research and look regionally, but ultimately the decisions have to be decided locally around how to really advance this work and to really see traction. Our partnership is going to work to advance in 3 strategic areas. Number 1, we're going to draw on this research and the expertise of Women Leading Ed, of things like the Superintendent Research Project. We showed you what it looked like as we partnered with a state already. We're going to go deeper on this. We're going to really examine the state of women in educational leadership and identify best practices to removing those barriers and promoting women's career progressions. And we're going to fast charge the research that we've got out there to make sure that it's publicly available and that we really step on the gas in terms of getting more women into these top roles. Second, we're going to really partner around program and pathway development. National Center has done incredible work on Grow Your Own for both teacher and principal pathways. We're now going to apply all of the work that we've been doing for years, developing curriculum, content, and programming through Women Leading Ed, both at the district and the state level, to join together to really create programs and initiatives that aim at preparing, developing, and advancing women leaders at every stage into the superintendency. Third, we're going to partner around this advocacy and awareness work. We need to bring more organizations together to really advocate in one voice around policy change, around messaging for the media, and raising awareness about the importance of gender equality in educational leadership in order to successfully advocate for more women in these top roles. The time is now to address gender equality issues, and through this collaboration, we aim to develop and expand much more sustainable pathways so women are not only getting into those top roles, but we're seeing more Kyla Johnson-Trammell's of the world that are sustaining and accelerating for the long term when they're in them.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. We're excited to partner with you in this work. Excited to partner with Virginia Department of Ed as well. I'm the teacher and principal, and with Oakland Unified, we have who I've gotten to know very well, Sarah Glasvan, in our National Registered Apprenticeship District Network. So really exciting to see this work. But Julia, we're excited to partner with you all in this. And so this was something that was personal to me because of my mom. My mom was my school cafeteria worker who taught Sunday school and vacation Bible school for over 2 decades, but she couldn't afford to go to school. I've been thinking more and more and reflecting as time's gone on to realize I was actually in an apprenticeship It just wasn't registered because I, in high school, worked with her for 4 years every Sunday in a kindergarten Sunday school classroom before I then, became a substitute teacher, then a teacher and all that. So it's changing things so that people like my mom would never face something like this again. And I also think, Julia, we both know, we've talked about Lillian, Dr. Lillian Laurie, who really is was an incredible leader, who talk about pipelines, talk about sponsorship, set the example for what this work should look like. Speaking of sponsorship and shifting it a little bit to how what men can be and should be doing better, one of the things we noticed when we launched this webinar was, based on our estimates, about 85 to 90% of those who registered for this webinar were women. My question is, what should men specifically be doing to support more women in their leadership journeys? But also, any thoughts on how we get more men to attend sessions like this and hear from your experiences, as well as hearing about the data? This is for any of y'all to respond to that would like to.
David, I think it starts with the same thing in the concept of a sponsorship, right? A sponsorship invites you in and expands your network. I think as women, we need to invite men into this conversation and expand their view, right? Like, men might be, oh, it's a women thing, it's got women in the title. No, we need to, as leaders, we are inviting women into our network and our sponsorship. We also need to invite men into the conversation. We need to open the door and bring them into the conversation, not just expect them to walk in the conversation, but actually invite them in and have those conversations. Because if we're not opening the door and bringing them in, we're not asking them to change, right? And we're not asking them to build a cadre and an open mind if we're not bringing them to the table, setting the table, and having the conversation with them. So I think it is upon us who are out there making the difference in women in leadership roles to bring more men into the conversation about the data and research that we have that have been amazingly collected by Julia and her team, to be able to start that conversation. But we have to invite people to that conversation first.
I would also say, I think it's important to underscore the value proposition, right, for the time, right? Nationally, we have a staffing shortage. And so that means that we need to think differently around how to recruit folks into these positions. And a lot of what the research shows across many different fields is that we don't do a good job of growing and developing the people that work for us. So if you go back to the statistics of who are in, overwhelmingly women are in education. We still are the foundation of making sure that we have of democracy. I mean, if you really think about it, because that's the role of schools. Yet we don't do a good job of growing and developing the talent that is right before us. So you can call me pessimistic. Sometimes it's not about altruism. It's about, right, in order for us to do our jobs, we're in the business of teaching and learning. We need to have talented people in these seats. This is good business, actually. I'm glad I feel good too, but it's really just good business and making sure that we can continue to accelerate the best and the brightest. And if they are there, right before us, then what are some of the things that we need to do? I think the sponsorship is one piece, specifically really opening the door and nudging the operational side. And I say that because at the end of the job, whether it's at the state level or whether it is at the superintendent level, you are a chief executive officer, right? I oversee over $1 billion of funds. And that's the piece of the job that usually as women, you are not privy to. And even as a principal, right, all the roles leading up to the top seats, right, as a leader, as a male leader, are you nudging folks to present at board meetings? Are you nudging folks toward more of the operational pieces of the job? Being in the strategy meeting, helping to design, right, the philanthropy support that's coming in, so that you're getting those experiences, right, along the way. So there are things that can be done that men are in a better position to do quantitatively, because they're in more of these roles still than women are. And that's what a lot of the research shows, that there's specific areas, right? Not saying more support and instruction isn't helpful, but that's overwhelmingly where we are anyways. We're not understanding necessarily how you design a parcel tax. We're not understanding necessarily how you strategically walk your community through having to make some major, reductions, right? If you're in a system where you have a downturn, all these other pieces, we're not necessarily in a position to understand politics. And, I like to say a lot of times we tend to lean into politics as something negative, but it's something that's essential and can be powerful, right? And productive. And we want more women to see themselves as leaders and just incorporate that part of it. So I would say those specific areas, but also that it's just good business, because it can ultimately mean we should see less attrition, right? And we'll have a stronger pipeline, which right now, it's not where it needs to be.
So one thing, Kyla, that you said that stuck out to me was just, and this isn't about men or women in this case specifically, but the amount of the work that we do, and with specifically with chief talent officers, and they don't even know the first thing about budgets. That misinformation, or the lack of information being shared in the black box. I always say I benefited because I had a CFO who was a former principal. And so he took the time to train me, to teach me on these things. Because we always, it's weird. One of my little lines that I use in a lot of my presentations is, you got to turn a CF no into a CF yes. And it gets laughs, but sometimes it gets nervous laughter because it hits a little too real. And so I couldn't agree more, kind of, about how do we get folks more exposure to all the different aspects. Because I mean, look, I am not envious of Lisa or Kyla one bit of either of y'all, because you are a chief executive officer. It's insane the budgets you oversee and the amount you're responsible for. I do pray for you all, though, just so you're aware. So speaking of hopeful things like prayer, what brings you hope about this work? What is the thing that makes you with women leading ed and the movement? Because I really appreciate that comment about like being pragmatic. Yes, it is the way it is right now in certain cases because men have been in certain parts of these roles, and it's going to take a minute to be able to break that. We got to get more women into these operation roles to be able then to reap the benefits of women coming from operations side as well as academics into the superintendency. So with that said, for any of you that would like to answer, what brings you hope about this work?
David, I think there's a conversation about why and why not. So when I started this journey, it was why, and I think there's a gender opposite question of why not kind of moment, right? And I think when I started having conversations with fellow women about the opportunities, whether it was in a school division or school district or at a state level, a lot of those conversations started with why. I think today, when I'm starting to have those conversations, more women are starting those conversations with why not. And I think it's exciting to see that shift from the why to the why not happen across our women, and to see them start to vision themselves into leadership roles, and to see themselves vision into the sponsorship opportunities that we have for them. I'm just really excited to hear the conversation and the narrative change from that why to why not for aspiring women leaders.
Yeah, I think when I started, mine was more like hell to the no to let's do this. That's been more of my leadership journey into this seat. I think what gives me hope is I can't quite put into words yet. Like when we had our Women Leading Ed Summit and just seeing all these women together. I mean, the buzz in the room, the love in the room, the exhales in the room, right? Just how much this space is needed so much. And I feel like we're barely scratching the surface in terms of the need that's out there. And just how much doubt there is, coupled with like the amazing talent. And just for some folks, just the level of why not? Yes, you can do this that folks need, right? If they have that and they have the support, they'll make the decision to apply for the job. So I just feel like there's so much talent, and there's so many women that, you know, you have a couple of conversations and you can hear they've been thinking about doing this sometimes for multiple years, and just needing just that guidance and support to what feels like jumping off a cliff. You know, and metaphorically, it can feel that way sometime, but you know, there's going to be a parachute, and you're going to land successfully. So yeah, I just feel like there's so much purpose and opportunity for the work that we're doing, which is so exciting and gratifying.
And David, I think for me right now, what makes me so hopeful is just progress. We're seeing it happen. We're seeing it here when you look at these careers of both Kyla and Lisa. And it's not just ultimately about the numbers, although I continue to be really thrilled by how many more women are really seeing themselves as ready and really understanding this awareness about the problem. And every woman who steps into these leadership roles is then redefining what's possible within these roles. And that is incredibly hopeful. And I think as we're starting to get more of an awareness, particularly at the state level, about what's happening within states, how we can chip away at policies that are getting in the way, and having conversations like this that just help to shake up the status quo, it is time to be able to really start to step on the gas with change. And it's not waiting for permission anymore.
Well, I want to thank each of you for your leadership and for your participation today. Folks that are attending, folks where, you know, when we post this as well online, if you are interested in being a superintendent, please, please, please reach out to Julia. If you are interested in how to have a successful, long superintendency, specifically at a district level too, please, please watch, learn, listen from Kyla. If you want to talk about hitting the ground running and hiring an incredible staff and the first 100-day plan and woof, what Dr. Coons had, Lisa went through, is incredible to work. So I think, and from a state leadership perspective too, folks, that was the intention of having these panelists. I'm smarter by being here with this last hour with you all, more informed and recommitted to continuing this work. On behalf of National Center for Grow Your Own, and the only time I'll speak for Julia on the behalf of Women Leading Ed, thank you so much for coming. Again, thank you, Lisa, Kyla, and Julia, for your expertise and sharing your wisdom today. Take care, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
Bye now.